Chapter 1. Detective Brett Jacobs had just gotten back to his office after testifying at the trial of Rich Millett. Millett was the leader of a well-known criminal organization that had their hands in just about everything: drugs, money laundering, extortion, murder, and guns. They had plenty of muscle and liked to use it. They'd been nicknamed Millett's Maulers for their eagerness in dishing out violence and punishment. Jacobs had worked an undercover assignment for 9 months, eventually arresting the big boss on extortion and an attempted murder plot. Millett was given a 15-year prison sentence for his crimes, and he, along with his underlings, had vowed to get revenge on Jacobs for his part in getting the leader convicted. When Jacobs got back to the office, he was given a lot of high fives and pats on the back for his work. He didn't do much celebrating, though. It was a big day for him, no doubt, but he tried never to get too high or too low after court appearances. It was a motto that served him well over his past few years as a detective. He was always told to not let a court decision affect him too much, whether it was a victory or a verdict that went against him. Jacobs started out as a patrol officer as a 21-year-old kid, and after 6 years in the patrol unit, made detective. He'd been in the detective unit for the last 4 years. This past year had been hard on him. 9 of those 12 months had been spent infiltrating the Millett gang. He was good at his job, devoted to it, almost to a fault, some would say, but he was also devoted to his family. He tried to balance his work and personal life the best he could, though oftentimes it felt like the job usually won out. Jacobs sat down at his desk and took out a file folder from one of the drawers and placed it on the desk. He opened it up and started moving a few papers around, intently looking for a few more cases to start working on. One of his superiors, Sergeant Buchanan, walked over to his desk and sat down next to him. Buchanan was about 10 years older than Jacobs, but they'd become close over the past few years, working together on several cases. Buchanan was almost like an older brother, in addition to being a close friend. "Getting down to work already?" Buchanan asked. "A lot more people out there who need to go to the same place Millett is." "What are you on? A personal vendetta to get rid of the whole organization?" Jacobs didn't pick his head up once to look at the sergeant, instead continuing to focus on the information in front of him. "Maybe I am." "Are you still worried about that threat Millett made against you?" "It's crossed my mind." "Brett, go home. Spend some time with your family. The stuff will all still be here tomorrow. Take a break." "In jail or not, Millett's still a very dangerous man," Jacobs said. "Just because he's locked up doesn't mean he's not still able to give orders. You know that. And the people he's still got walking the streets are just as dangerous." "I know that. All I'm saying is take some time to enjoy that beautiful family of yours." Buchanan got up and gave Jacobs a pat on the shoulder before he left. Jacobs took his eyes off the paperwork in front of him and thought about what he'd just heard. He came to the conclusion that the sergeant was right. 9 of the last 12 months were spent away from his family. That was a long time to be away from a wife and 3 kids, all of whom were under 10. While working the Millett case, he missed precious family time, moments that he'd never get back. He had a beautiful wife, a 9-year-old girl, and 6 and 3-year-old boys, and they all missed their father. Jacobs shuffled the papers back into the file folder and returned it to the drawer. He went over to Buchanan's desk and let him know he was taking the rest of the day off, which wasn't technically even necessary, considering he was supposed to have the day off anyway. He was only needed for court duty and wasn't supposed to come back to the office. So, he went home to be with his family. The Jacobs lived in a modest condo in Hyde Park, a neighborhood in the south side of Chicago and located on the shore of Lake Michigan. Hyde Park was one of Chicago's most racially diverse neighborhoods, as well as housing several well-known museums, along with the University of Chicago. As Jacobs pulled into the designated parking spot in front of their condo, he saw Valerie and the kids sitting on the front steps. He called his wife from the car to let her know he was on his way home. His daughter was a voracious reader and had a book in her hand, like she usually did. His boys were playing with some toy cars and trucks. "You guys waiting for me?" Jacobs asked as he started walking up the steps. "I couldn't keep them in," his wife answered. His kids stopped what they were doing and ran down the steps to hug him. His wife followed them and planted a kiss on his lips. He put his arms around them as they walked back up the steps toward the door. "Can we go, Dad?" Jenna asked. Go? Go where?" "Please, Dad," Jonathan said. Jacobs let out a laugh. "Where are we going? What are you guys asking about?" "I'm sorry, dear," Valerie said. "I made the mistake of mentioning about possibly seeing a movie today, and now that's all they're talking about." "Oh, well, that's okay." "I know you're probably tired and don't feel like going or anything. I thought maybe I could take them if you wanted to take a nap or something." "Please, Dad," Jonathan pleaded again. Jacob smiled, not able to say no to the 3 pairs of innocent eyes looking up at him. "How can I say no to these guys?" he said, rubbing his son's head. "Yay!" the boys said in unison. "You're a big softie," Valerie said, giving her husband another kiss. "Hey, they're good kids. They deserve it." "You're sure you don't mind?" "Nah, take them out. Have fun. Maybe when you guys get back, we can go out to dinner or something. Have some family time together." "That sounds like a great idea." "Can we get ice cream too?" his youngest, James, said. Jacob squatted, getting down to his son's level to look him in the eyes. "I think I might be persuaded to include some ice cream in the deal." "Yay!" James said, giving his father a huge squeeze. "All right, why don't you guys go get ready?" Feeling good, Jacobs watched as his kids went up the steps. Valerie put her arm through his, locking them together, and put her head on his shoulder. Jacobs kissed her on the top of her head. "How was court?" she asked. "Good. Let's not talk about it, though." "Why not?" Jacobs turned toward his wife and put his arm around her and planted a kiss on her lips. "Because you've given up a lot already. Me not being around, for one. Let's not lose any more of our time together because of the job. Let's just focus on us." Valerie smiled, liking the sound of that. They kissed for another minute, only the sounds of their children running down the steps breaking it up. "Sure didn't take them long," Jacobs said. "They've been looking forward to this all day." "Maybe if we put them to bed early tonight, you and I can continue this later." "Sounds good to me," Valerie said, giving her husband one more kiss. "You get some rest. You're gonna need it later." "I'll hold you to that." Jenna had already gotten her mother's purse and had it waiting in the car with them as they eagerly awaited their movie outing. As the car pulled out of its spot, Jacobs waved goodbye to his family as they drove away. Once the car was out of sight, Jacobs happily hopped up the steps and into the house. He locked the door, then, like he usually did, put his gun and his badge inside a locked box, then put the box inside a drawer. Then he locked the drawer, too. He'd heard of and known too many stories of kids having an accident, playing with a gun and shooting themselves. He was damn sure not going to let that happen in his house. Jacobs put his phone down on the table and walked into the kitchen and poured himself a cup of soda from a 2-liter bottle. He then went back into the living room to put the TV on and plopped himself down on the sofa. He watched an old movie for about 10 minutes before lying down, almost instantly drifting off to sleep. It was a little nap that he desperately needed. Even after being done with his undercover work, he was still working 12 to 15-hour days to get ready for the trial, as well as his other work that he needed to get done. Several hours later, he was woken up by the sound of his phone ringing. Jacobs lay there, his eyes slow to open, just watching the TV for a few seconds. The room looked a little dark to him, and something didn't seem right. He looked to the window, and through a small slit in the curtains, could see that it was no longer light out. It must have been later than he figured. Valerie and the kids should have been back by now, he thought. He looked over at the digital clock on the table. He'd been sleeping for 4 hours. His heart started beating faster, and his mind raced with thoughts that he didn't want to be thinking. Where were they? Why weren't they back yet? He then remembered his phone ringing and thought maybe it was Valerie calling for help. Maybe they had car trouble somewhere. Jacobs hurried himself over to the window and looked down to their parking spot, hoping to see the car parked there. Maybe they got back and saw he was still sleeping and went for a walk. That's what he hoped for, anyway. He turned back around and rushed over to the table and picked up his phone, seeing that he had several missed phone calls. None from Valerie, though. He had a few calls from other detectives in his unit, including one from Sergeant Buchanan. He also had a few text messages from several of those same detectives, all asking him to call them back. He thought it strange that all the calls and texts were from the last hour. He scrolled to Buchanan's number and called him back first. The sergeant answered almost immediately.
Brett, where are you?
I'm home. Why? When I got here, I was beat. Valerie told me to take a nap, and she took the kids to a movie. She actually should have been back by now. I'm starting to get worried about her.
We've been trying to get a hold of you. You usually pick up right away.
It looks like everyone in the unit's been trying to get a hold of me. What's going on? Jacobs answered.
I'm actually only a few minutes away from you. I'll stop by.
The concern in Jacobs' head had now escalated to a code red alert. He couldn't think of any reason his friend would be stopping by, unless something terrible had happened. Bucky, what's going on?
I don't really want to say over the phone. I left about 20 minutes ago, so I should be there in about 5 minutes.
Left where?
I'll be there in a few minutes, okay?
Jacobs wanted to keep arguing and make Buchanan tell him what was going on, but something was nagging at him that he already knew. He hung up and immediately scrolled to Valerie's number and called it. As it kept ringing, he prayed that she would pick up. It went to voicemail, though. He hung up and quickly redialed. Come on, pick up, pick up. It went to voicemail again. Jacobs couldn't shake that voice deep inside that was telling him something was wrong. He tried Valerie's number again, still without any luck. He brought his hand up to his face and started rubbing around his mouth, mostly out of nervousness. A terrified feeling came over him as his heart was pounding, afraid of what Buchanan was going to tell him once he got there. Jacobs went back to the window and looked out at the street as he waited for his friend to arrive. As he waited, he put the phone on speaker and continued trying to reach Valerie, though at this point, it seemed to be a fruitless effort. Nevertheless, he kept trying, over and over again. 6 minutes went by, and Jacobs was getting even more anxious with each passing second. He started fidgeting with his fingers on the curtain, wondering what was taking Buchanan so long to get there. 2 more minutes passed until the familiar sight of Buchanan's car parked in front of the building. But that wasn't all. Jacobs was horrified to see a patrol unit car park right behind him. A lump went down his throat as he waited for the 3 officers to walk up the steps to the house. He couldn't help but feel like they were giving him a death notification. As the officers got near the front door, Jacobs walked over and opened it. Buchanan stood in the doorway, him and Jacobs staring at each other in the eye, neither saying a word. Nothing had to be said. Jacobs knew what he was there for, and Buchanan, he could already see the pain in his friend's eyes. The tears that were starting to form in Jacob's eyes did all the talking for him. After a minute of silence, Buchanan thought it would be better if they all went inside. Can, we come in? "I've been trying to call Val," Jacobs said, hoping beyond hope that the sergeant would say something to alleviate his fears. "I can't get through to her." "Let's sit on the couch," Buchanan said, putting his arm around his friend. "Just tell me." Jacobs took a step back, ready to hear the worst, his eyes glossy. Buchanan took a deep breath as he thought of how to deliver the news. The entire drive there, he tried to think of what he'd say, how he'd say it. But nothing sounded good enough. These types of things were never easy. Even when they notified strangers of unspeakable tragedies, it was difficult. Delivering the same kind of message to a friend was almost impossible. But he knew he needed to say something. He couldn't just stand there in silence and let his friend tear himself to pieces. "Brett," Buchanan said, trying to keep himself together. He looked at the two uniformed officers, the pain plainly evident on his own face as he continued. "There was, something happened." Buchanan looked toward the floor, unable to get the words out that he needed to. Jacobs took a few more steps back until his shoulder blades knocked into the wall. "They're dead?" Jacobs asked, tears flowing down both sides of his face. "I'm so sorry," the sergeant responded, shedding a few tears himself. No. Jacobs shook his head a few times, not ready to believe it. He balled both hands into a fist and slammed them into the wall behind him several times as he tried to process the news. Buchanan put his hand on one of Jacobs' shoulders as he tried to console him. Jacobs then slid down the wall until he sat on the floor, pulling his knees up to his face as he buried his head, crying uncontrollably. In his 20 years of experience, Buchanan had seen a lot of people break down in front of him after telling them a loved one had passed away or been killed. But none of them were as heartbreaking to him as this was. He put his hands on his hips, wishing this was nothing but a nightmare, one they'd all wake up from any second. It wasn't a nightmare, though, at least not one they could wake up from. Jacobs started rocking in place as he picked his head up, his eyes dancing around the room, not moving in any direction. Then he suddenly got back to his feet. He wiped the tears from his eyes, an angry look developing on his face. But he lowered his head again, not able to choke back the tears as they streamed down his face again. After a few seconds, he picked his head up. "Valerie?" "She's gone," Buchanan softly replied. Jacobs started moving his head forward and back, letting the back of it hit the wall continuously. "The kids? They're all gone," Buchanan said, barely able to get the words out. "Oh, God," Jacobs said, putting his hands over his face as he bawled into them. Buchanan put his hand on his friend's arm. "We'll help you get through this. I want to see them." "No," Buchanan said, shaking his head. "That's not a good idea. I want to see them." "You don't want to see them like that." "Like what? What happened?" Buchanan looked down at the floor again and wiped one of his eyes. They were shot." "Shot?" Jacobs asked in horror. Up until that point, he had assumed his family was in some kind of car accident. Being gunned down wasn't something that had entered his thought process. "I want to see them. Where are they?" "Not just yet, buddy. Not just yet." It wasn't an answer that satisfied Jacobs. He suddenly bolted to the front door and tried to run past the patrol officers, splitting them in the middle. The two officers each grabbed hold of him and prevented the detective from getting past them. They held him at bay for a minute, though he tried desperately to get away from them and get out the door, even though he had no idea where his family was at the moment. "I want to see them! I want to see them!" Buchanan looked at the officers and pointed to the couch, directing them to lead Jacobs over to it. Though he was still trying to get away from them, The two cops led him in that direction, trying to be as gentle as they could with him. They put him on the couch, though Jacobs was still fighting to get away, trying to push the two officers off of him. They were all sitting, but Jacobs was still flailing his legs around as he tried to slip away. Buchanan walked over to him and put his hands on Jacobs' knees to try and calm him down. He opened his mouth, about to tell his friend to relax and take it easy, but he quickly thought better of it. It just didn't seem like the right thing to say at the time. How do you tell someone who just lost everything they held dear in their life to relax or take it easy? The sergeant tapped Jacobs on the knees, trying to let him know that he understood and was with him. Buchanan couldn't even try to imagine what kind of pain he was going through, but he knew it was immense. All he could do was try to be there for his friend in his most difficult time of need.